We've come a long way from cowering in the bushes of pitch black maps against one of the 3 killers in the game, chases taking place in straight lines before people figured out that killers' collision radiuses are wider than survivors, which meant looping around the edges of structures would offset the killer's increased movement speeds, giving birth to pallet looping. Nowadays, most people don't even try hiding in mid-skill level matches and above, instead either getting straight into position at their nearest loop in preparation for the chase, or extending the chase even further by pre-running the moment they hear the killer's terror radius, forcing the killer to spend an extra 15 seconds catching up before the chase even begins, or just dropping that survivor altogether. And 3 killers? Multiply that by 10 and you're still 10 short of the whopping 40 killers we're at today. Damn, that's a lot of killers. How do they come up with so many different abilities without running out of ideas? Well, that's a perfect segue to the topic of today's video. Recently, there's been some discussion bubbling up in the community around the topic of power creep, power recycling, and questioning if the devs have run out of ideas. So let's start by turning our attention to some of the oldest killers in the game and break down their powers before covering how things have progressed as time went on. First up, Trapper. It's a bloke who can walk around, pick up bear traps off the floor and place them wherever he likes. His design was really as simple as you can get. There were no other side effects or speed boosts like he gets today. The gameplay as and against him was really as simple as place traps and don't step in traps. The Wraith was also incredibly simple too. He could ring his bell to go invisible and ring it again to become visible again. There was no significant speed boost while cloaked and no big post-uncloak lunge boost. Again, nice and simple. And Billy. He could chainsaw to go fast, which would insta-down a survivor if it hit them. Nice and simple. Nurse. She can teleport in a straight line in front of her. Again, nice and simple. Myers. Stare at people. Hag. Place traps and teleport to them. It wasn't until the 11th of May 2017 with the release of the Doctor where we saw our first dose of complexity, as he was a stance switcher with both a primary ability and a passive alongside a whole host of debuffs for the survivors. But those multiple abilities were offset by the fact that they both did the exact same thing. His shock therapy simply applied those debuffs and that's it. It didn't block the survivors out of pallets and windows, and his passive static field was simply a slower method of applying those exact same debuffs. So while his character description was practically a Harry Potter's book worth of text, playing as him was as simple as shock the survivor a couple of times and then run at them, and playing against him was still as simple as run away from the bad man. Then after that, straight back to simple killers like the Huntress, which is simply me throw hatchet. Comparing those killers to some of our more recent releases makes it look like a completely different game. Let's jump straight to everybody's favourite example. Vecna, a killer with 4 completely separate abilities with different functions and independent cooldowns. 1 for information, 1 for mobility, and 2 for use in chase. Again, these were all on separate cooldowns, so it's not even like he has to make the choice between one tool or the other. Instead, he gets to throw all of them at you one by one. This means that during chases, even if you manage to dodge the skeletons, you've still got the hand to deal with, which can both block undropped pallets and pick up pre-dropped pallets. But the block can also be faked, which adds even more depth to the gameplay. Just to clarify, I don't think people are arguing that Vecna is overpowered or needs nerfs, it's just that he's a prime example of power creep and bloated killer designs, since unlike the killers of old, he doesn't need to choose between a chase power or a mobility power, instead having everything rolled into one. While most people point straight to Vecna in the discussion of power creep, I'd argue that our first huge jump in this regard actually came before Vecna, with the release of one of the most popular killers in the game, Wesker. If he released with just his dash, complete with grabs, slams and wall throws, it would have been a fairly standard release in line with the usual killers we used to get, and he still would have been popular as the dash itself is what makes him so fun. But of course, there's more to Wesker than just the dash itself. There's also his ability to use it to vault windows faster than regular killers and vault over pallets too, just like Legion. But unlike Legion, Wesker doesn't have to enter a completely separate fatigue in order to down a survivor after doing said vault, as well as his infection mechanic. This would apply after hitting a survivor with a dash, and after hitting maximum infection, the survivor would have 2 debuffs applied to them. The first is that they would get insta-downed when hit by a dash, even at full health. The second was a permanent hindered effect, slowing the survivor's movement speed originally by an almighty 8% at all times, until they disinfected themselves with a spray can. Again, I'm not saying Wesker is OP, but it's a huge jump from something like me walk a bit faster with a chainsaw. That being said, it's not like the topic of power creep had never been mentioned before, but Vecna marked the point where it had become more of a widespread talking point amongst the community. The argument most often cited to keep people calm was that although these newer killers had many different options with their abilities and more answers to different things in the game, each of these sub-abilities were generally weaker than the whole ability of a more traditional killer with only one power, with the sum of all the abilities adding up together being roughly equal to a regular ability, sort of like a jack of all trades, master of none type thing. But this argument met a swift demise with the release of Dracula, another killer with multiple different abilities. However, what set Dracula's multiple abilities apart from Vecna's is that all three of Dracula's had very similar standalone counterparts belonging to different killers. We had Vampire Form, which is a ranged line attack with a long wind-up, like Pyramid Head, Wolf Form, which was a straight line dash attack, like the Demogorgon, and then the Bat Form, which was a high movement speed mobility tool where the killer cannot see the survivors, like the Spirit. As all three of his sub-abilities were very similar to existing kits, this brought a new topic into the conversation: are behaviour running out of ideas? To be fair, DBD at its core is such a simple game, so I'm honestly quite impressed that they managed to come up with so many abilities that are unique. But there's no denying that these sub-abilities were far from original. But there's a reason I said that this topic joined the conversation and didn't take it over entirely, because discussions around power creep also stepped up in intensity with this release. Remember the previous talk about all these sub-abilities totaling up to something roughly equal to a regular killer's single ability? Well, that defense can't be used for Dracula, as pretty much all three of his sub-abilities are straight up upgrades over their single ability counterparts. Dracula's Vampire Form is supposed to have the downside of not going through walls the way Pyramid Head's does, but a lot of the time if there's a tiny crack, slope, or any weird geometry on the wall, it'll just go straight over anyway. On top of that, Pyramid Head's version comes with the downside of heavily restricting his turning, making it significantly harder to hit than a point-and-click sniper shot, but Dracula's version? No such restriction. His Wolf Form has the downside of the dash having a cooldown unlike the Demogorgons and being slightly shorter range. However, this is a double dash, meaning that he pounces once, has the ability to change direction, and then pounces again, offsetting the reduced range altogether and allowing him to dash around corners, which the Demogorgon just can't do. Dracula's dashes can also hug tech on a huge variety of different loops, further increasing its lethality. Whereas, once again, the Demogorgon can't really hug tech apart from a very small few spots, like the infamous cars which have bugged collision for most movement-based abilities. But it gets even better. Not only is the pounce straight up better, but just for existing in Wolf Form, Dracula also gets Centaurs, which reduce the cooldown of the pounce by 20% each, but also increases his movement speed to 120% for 2.5 seconds, with a new orb dropping from survivors in chase between every 1 to 5 seconds. And finally, the Bat Form. This has the downside of not allowing him to instantly lunge upon cancelling it, unlike the Spirit. It also moves slightly slower at 162.5% speed compared to the Spirit's 176%. But of course, it doesn't stop there. It also comes with the ability to quickly teleport to windows and pallets at a huge range, travelling up and down platforms too. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, that screams power creep. 3 entire killers rolled into one with straight up improvements to their powers. Once again, this isn't a call to nerf Vecna and Dracula, as there's also another power creep trend that's been occurring for quite a while now. Sadako, or as I'm starting to think is a more accurate title for her, Reverse Pig. Not for how many times she's been nerfed, but for how many times other killers around her have had her power, but better. Let me explain. Sadako is of course an infamously weak killer, being a quote-unquote stealth killer with a hefty 24-meter wide lullaby, preventing survivors from being caught off guard like they would with a ghost face for example, so it gets resigned to basically just being a mind game tool. Then there's her passive condemned mechanic, which allows her to mori someone regardless of hooks after a long build up that's very easy for survivors to manage, with the exception of a select few maps such as the game, and finally, her teleport. The teleport serves as great map pressure, but each TV goes on cooldown after she teleports to it, somewhat limiting how much she can pressure the map. Survivors can also put a TV onto cooldown themselves by taking a tape from it, further restricting her map pressure. Every TV also starts with a long cooldown at the start of the match, limiting her early game. Since her passive is easy for survivors to manage, and her stealth literally has a lullaby the size of the Hag's terror radius, that generally makes the teleport her main power. So who does Sadako but better? The Dredge, with a better anti-loop and mind game tool as his primary ability, passive Nightfall mechanic, and his locker teleport giving him just as good map pressure while having a very short cooldown of just a few seconds, also having that very short cooldown at the start of the match, letting him get started much quicker than Sadako can. The Xenomorph, with a very potent anti-loop ability when it's not outright disabled by the turrets, and the underground tunnel mechanic, having literally zero cooldown whatsoever and providing information about the survivors up above. The Unknown, passively dropping his clones around the map which he can teleport to with a long cooldown, alongside having a very strong anti-loop ability as his main power. Dracula, due to the teleport on bat mode being very wide and fast, although not technically map wide, alongside all of his other powers. And finally, the breaking point for many people, Springtrap. Springtrap has his door teleportation, which has absolutely zero cooldown whatsoever and is active from the second the match starts, allowing him to start his first chase within 10 seconds of the game starting, which also grants him far better stealth than Sadako, and in fact most stealth killers in general, for 20 seconds each time he teleports, while also serving as an insta-down if he catches a survivor using them, as well as a ranged anti-loop axe similar to the Huntress, except this one is much more heavily weighted and arcs down much faster, allowing him to throw the axe up over a wall, crashing back down onto the survivor he's chasing, which is even more threatening. But wait, there's more. By default, he's 110% speed just like the Huntress, but once he throws his axe, he automatically gets bumped up to 115% until he retrieves it again, something that the Huntress would have to waste an add-on slot for with the ultra rare Soldier's Putty. He also doesn't need to waste time reloading at lockers, instead just being able to press a button to instantly get a new hatchet in his hand after a short cooldown between 7 to 10 seconds. But having only one hatchet doesn't hold him back too much, as he is even better at zoning than the Huntress due to his movement speed not dropping as low as hers while holding a hatchet out. Springtrap speed while holding a hatchet is 92%, whereas Huntress's is only 77%. He's a high chase pressure, high map pressure Sadako Huntress hybrid, but better, which of course provided further fuel to the debates regarding power recycling and power creep. Despite how undeniably power crept Springtrap is, it seems most of the community deems him as quite well balanced. With that being said, DBD's power creep is undeniable, and while the community seems okay with it so far, we're left with two questions. How much is too much, and do the old killers just get left behind?